Okay, it's a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Donald Devine to Florida Atlantic University. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Devine. The Washington Post labeled Dr. Devine as Reagan's terrible swift sword of the civil service as civil service director of the U.S. Office of Personnel Management during President Reagan's first term, when they cut 100,000 bureaucratic jobs and saved more than $6 billion by reducing benefits. Before and after his government service, he has been an academic, teaching 14 years as associate professor of government and politics at the University of Maryland, and for a decade as a professor of Western civilization at Bellevue University, following the former president's entreaty to teach the American heritage to the next generation. He is currently senior scholar for the Fund for American Studies in Washington, D.C., an adjunct scholar at the Heritage Foundation, a writer and editor and policy consultant. Dr. Devine is the author of 8 books: The Attentive Public, The Political Culture of the United States, Does Freedom Work?, Reagan Electionomics, Reagan's Terrible Swift Sword, Restoring the 10th Amendment, In Defense of the West, and his most recent book, America's Way Back. Please help me welcome Dr. Devine. Don, the floor is yours.
All right, as Marshall said, my name is Donald Devine, and kind of my claim to fame is that I ran the civil service for a president who came in to make some changes, and unlike most of them, they all want to do something different, but he really did. I remember when he called up and he said, "Don, I got a job for you." I said, "What is it?" He says, "Director of the Office of Personnel Management, OPM." My son used to call it opium. Office of Personnel Management. I said, "That's the head of the civil service." And he said, "Yeah, that's it." I said, "Well, that's kind of a funny job for a kind of limited government, even somewhat libertarian person." He says, "Well, I got a good sense of humor." I said, "Yeah, you sure do. What do you want me to do?" And he said, "Well, I want you to cut back the size of the non-defense bureaucracy. It's too large and inflexible. I want you to cut their benefits, which are much higher than in the private sector. And I want you to make them work harder." I said, "Thanks a lot. Going to make a lot of friends in this job." But I always remembered when Harry Truman, who was a Democratic president, so we'll cover both parties. I always remember what he said about if you're going to do a tough job in Washington and you feel like you're going to need some friends there, he said, "Well, if you need a friend in Washington, buy a dog." So I kind of bought 2 to be on the safe side. And the crazy thing is we actually did it. We cut back 100,000 non-defense jobs. The first time the federal government had cut its personnel since World War II, when they vastly increased the size of the government. As Marshall said, I saved $6 billion, which may not impress you because in today's money that'd be $60 billion. And we did make them work hard. We put in a pay-for-performance system that worked pretty well for a period. Truman was right about the dog thing, though. They called me all kinds of things. Marshall mentioned that the Post called me Reagan's terrible swift sword of the civil service, because nobody really knows about the civil service out in the real world where the country is. But in Washington, that's the company town business. So kind of everybody knows about it, and they used to do terrible stories about you know, how I'm throwing people out in the snow and stuff like that. And the first year we were cutting back the government. It happened to be around Christmas, which was probably not the best planning in the world, but the New York Times even picked this one up. They called me the Grinch in the pinstripe suit for letting people go near Christmas. But in fact, we did it. The first shake-up of the bureaucracy in many, many years. And that wasn't all Ronald Reagan did. Ronald Reagan is the only president to absolutely reduce, not relatively, but reduce what we call discretionary spending, domestic discretionary spending by about 9%. No other president in modern times has cut it at all. All of them increased it significantly, but he cut it. Even on including entitlement programs, he cut it relatively, not absolutely, from 17.4 to 15.6% of wealth. He, on the foreign policy side, he was probably responsible more than anyone else for winning the Cold War. That's kind of not a bad accomplishment, too. And what happened? 25 years, for 25 years, a quarter of a century after, we had economic success, right up until the current recession, where even Democratic President Bill Clinton said Reagan was a transformational president. He even said during his period of time, the era of big government is over. Ronald Reagan kind of made America look at itself again and to see how bureaucratic and unresponsive that government was. And he came in and understood what the problem was, because he understood better than almost anyone what made America great, and just loved the Constitution for putting it all together in the right way. Indeed, he saw that all Western civilization was based on these same principles, and you can sum it up very simply in the 10th Amendment to the Constitution, the 10th Bill of Rights. It says, the powers not given to the national government are reserved to the states and the people. They set up this Constitution to give it a few things to do so it could do them right, and left everything else up to the state governments or local governments or the private sector. And that took America from being a hardship post in the British Empire. When the British were ruling the world, if you got sent to America, they gave you extra money because it was such a horrible place to go. And it took a while for us to get our act together. But this Constitution set a principle that's deep within all of Western civilization, that prosperity comes by allowing people to have enough freedom to exercise their own judgment, so that everybody can do part and contribute to making what Adam Smith called the Great Society. America put government together. We actually got it from England. Magna Carta goes back to the Middle Ages. This idea that that bringing power together isn't the answer for a successful society. What made society work was allowing each individual to be able to contribute the talents and abilities that he or she has, rather than trying to direct them from the center. America was so fortunate as Europe was becoming, under the so-called divine right of kings, as it was becoming more and more centralized. These colonists got on the ship and came over here, and they kept these same principles of freedom and decentralization and respect for law and tradition and morality. They brought them over here, and the British were fighting the French and everybody else, and they forgot about us. So we developed these ideas. We took them from the British Bill of Rights and developed them as they were losing those very rights there to their centralized monarchy and later centralized parliament. Here, go ahead, sit down. Come on, go sit, that's fine. So while Europe was losing this idea of freedom and local responsibility and each individual being able to contribute to the success of society, we developed it over here. And then when the British finally got control of things in Europe, the king came over and tried to tell Americans, well, you guys got to shape up. The king or parliament tells you what you're supposed to do. And we said no. Of course, that's why we had the Tea Party and the Revolution, and we created our own society, culminating in the Constitution. All right, so that is kind of where we came from. We created this great Constitution, which in Article 1, Section 8 lists the powers the national government's supposed to have. And the 10th Amendment summed it up again. The federal government's going to do a couple of things that only a national government can do, like defense and some interstate commerce, other things. But most of what goes on in society is going to be done by individuals and the corporations and voluntary associations they form, their churches, their voluntary associations. The idea was to allow everybody to use their talent, and it worked. We came from a backwater country to become the envy of the world, richest, most powerful country everybody's seen. Well, you say, that isn't what America looks like today. All right, America has the predominant power in Washington, where I come from. And Washington is great. We have 7 of the richest counties in America. 7 out of the 10 top richest ones are in Washington. Did you know that? And when the rest of the country does badly, Washington does well. Why? Because we say, we're in such big economic trouble, send all your money to us and we'll spend it for you better than you can. Well, they try to do some good things with it, but as you can tell, a lot of the money stays there. Washington doesn't even know what a recession is like. 7 of the top 10 are there. How about these limited functions? Well, if you look at Article 1, Section 8, you're in the course on the Constitution, and you look at the responsibilities the national government's supposed to have, and then you look at the responsibilities they do have, and you say, hey, almost none of the biggest programs other than national defense, which is only third, are even in Article 1, Section 8. That's supposed to be the responsibility of the national government. We're in a situation today that the national debt that's reported is $17 trillion. And no one knows what a trillion is. It's a big number, all right? The total income of America is 15 trillion, and we owe 17 trillion. That's not a good situation to be in. But that's only the official budget. We don't count what we call entitlements in those. We don't count the money sitting in the Federal Reserve. There's 5 trillion sitting in the Federal Reserve that we don't count. And I'll add that to the 17. Well, on top of that, there's 16 trillion in Social Security that we don't count, that's unfunded. And much bigger than that is the Medicare program for the elderly. That unfunded liability is $38 trillion. That is our present to you. My generation present to you. A bill that you can't possibly pay off. And we've turned over to you a government that is so ossified and so frightened to do anything that they won't even think about it. If you talk in an election, say you want to run for president or Congress or whatever, and you go around telling people that the unfunded liability of the national government is so many times more than our ability to pay for, you're not going to get elected, probably. Nobody wants to hear, because when they hear where the money is spent, well, Social Security, nobody's going to get rid of Social Security. Medicare, what are you going to do? Throw the old people out in the street? It's all right in Florida maybe, but up where I am, it's pretty cold in the winter. Throw them out in the street. So we have an enormous problem. The government isn't the way it was set up to be. And then on top of that, just looking how the government functions, the top political science, public administration professor, he's led many national studies, a guy named Paul Light at New York University. He's self-professed progressive, he's not a conservative at all. He says the national government is so ossified from bureaucracy, which is his business, his specialty, mine too, is so ossified in bureaucracy it can't faithfully execute its laws. That term, if you remember in the Constitution class, is what the government is supposed to do, faithfully execute its laws. He says they can't do it. And you look at almost everything the federal government is doing today, and this is him, again, I'm a conservative, but he's just giving an objective scientific view of it. It doesn't work. We can't, all the airport security you go through all the time, all the hassle, twice a year the Department of Transportation tests that system, and about 90% of the guns that they smuggle aboard get through, right? We have a food safety system where in some areas we test 100% of what goes out, and still we have salmonella and the rest of that every year. We have some just foolish person, probably mentally ill, puts a bomb in his shoe and walks right through the security system. We have air controllers. The air control department doesn't even count near misses anymore. They have some kind of bureaucratic name. You look down the line, and this government can't work anymore. So we're giving you this enormous debt. We're giving you a government that doesn't know how to do anything with it, and we're giving you a bunch of elected officials who are afraid to raise the real issues. And not only their fault, they're frightened to raise the issues because you don't really want them to. You don't want to hear all that bad news. All right, that's the problem. Now you say, well, you're not going to leave us there. You got to give us some way out of this, right? All right, and that's what the book is called, America's Way Back, all right? But before you can get an idea of coming back, you have to know where you came from and how you got there. And how we came here is about the end of the 19th, the beginning of the 20th century. America had risen up from backwater to richest, most powerful, successful country in the world. And things were going pretty good. There were some big problems. We had slavery, but we just had a civil war that was fought over that issue. And although we still hadn't solved a lot of the problems, we killed several million people to try to do something to fix it up. We amended the Constitution to make up for that. So by the 20th century, most of the country, especially if you compare it to the rest of the world, even the poorest in America was doing better than most of the rest of the world. But of course, there's something in human nature. When things are going good, well, that's not good enough. We got to fix it. The basic problem with the Constitution, the founders put this thing together beautifully, and just almost since the day they fixed it, somebody has tried to improve it. The big change, though, came at the beginning of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, when one of probably the most important intellectual in America since the founders was going for his PhD, and he went to Europe, and he went around Europe and studied what was going on there to see what we could learn from Europe to straighten out America. And he came across Prussia. This was before Germany was united. Prussia was leading power there. And he saw that when they wanted to create something in Prussia, they did it. All they had to do was to get the Kaiser, who was a king, and his chancellor, and especially the chancellor. When they decided they were going to do something, they did it. And what had they created by the beginning of the 20th century? They had the world's first Social Security system for the elderly. America didn't have any. They had the first comprehensive health care system for everybody. America didn't have any. They had mandatory centralized education from grade school and by ability into college. They had created a welfare state. And this guy came back and said, this is what's wrong with America. The reason they can do all these things is they bring power together. The fundamental flaw of the American Constitution is it divides power out. And what we have to do to become great like Prussia is bring power back together under the national government and under the president and under the Congress and the courts. Anybody know who that was? He's probably the most important person in modern times, and yeah? Woodrow Wilson. Excellent. All right. See in your class? He better get an A. All right. All right. Woodrow Wilson was first an academic. He started the American Society for Public Administration. He started the American Political Science Association. He was instrumental in starting the American Economic Association, American Psychological Association. But this guy, when he came back with this idea, he transformed the way people thought in America. America was backwards by not being in the front of things to get all power together in one place. He won over the intellectuals. He became president of Princeton University, one of the top three in the country. He became governor of New Jersey and, of course, president of the United States. He transformed the way people thought about their Constitution. The Constitution became the problem. The solution was to bring power to Washington. And that brings us to today. We've had 70, 80 years of this. And what's the result? Debt we can't pay. Refusal even to face the problems of bureaucracy that's so big, so many levels between Washington and where you live and do your work that it can't do anything. Now, what Reagan tried to do is to go back to the original idea of the Constitution, that there should be a few functions that the federal government does and do them right. In fact, Reagan said in his first inaugural address, he says, "I'm not cutting government spending primarily to save money. I'm cutting it so that we can move responsibilities back to states, communities, individual, private sectors, associations, churches." The problem is that we've gotten away from what made America great. What made it great was letting most of these things done by individuals. You think, how can you run these things from the center? No one person knows how to do something as simple as making a pencil. No one knows how to make one. No single intellect knows how to grow the rubber to make the eraser on the top. No one knows the chemicals you need to do to make the wood work. No one knows how to form the metal clasp at the top. No one knows where to find the lead in it. What makes society work is that you know how to make the wood. You're a lumberman, and you know how to mine the zinc, and you know how to make the rubber, and everyone. There is no mind that knows how to do these things. Well, most Americans don't believe that anymore. They did once. But boy, if you need a lesson, I'll give you one word to remember: Obamacare. The federal government, with all the geniuses down there in Washington, had 3 years to put together a simple system. Every airline has this Most trucking companies do. Railroads have these systems. They couldn't do it. They couldn't do it in 3 years, and every day you read the paper, you find out more. I just read today's Wall Street Journal. They say only 17,000 people have signed up who didn't have coverage before. I mean, this idea that there's somebody sitting in Washington that knows how to do these things is pure myth. You know, the greatest social documentary, and I don't know how many of you have seen The Wizard of Oz? Oh, that's pretty good, all right. Now, what's The Wizard of Oz about? What's that? All right, what's the symbolism? What does that mean about the yellow brick road? You just follow it, all right? And what are you going to? What? Right. You have one guy didn't have a brain, right? The other one didn't have any courage. What was the heart? Right? And poor Dorothy can't get home, so they're going down the road to go where to find out if everything's all right. They're going to the Emerald Palace in Washington. Well, no, it wasn't in Washington, but the Emerald Palace, and they're going to have all these things given. A brain. Now think about getting a brain from the government. But anyway, so they go down there and they go inside this and get finally in the wonderful palace, beautiful, shiny, like Emerald City it was. All of this wonder, they finally get in and under the great statue of the wonderful wizard, and he's saying, "We'll do this," and all in his deep voice, and he's not saying anything responsive. All of a sudden, Dorothy goes over, and there's a curtain separates. You remember? All right? And what does she see? This whole impressive system is a little old man who's cranking a machine to make his voice sound authoritative. That's all it is there. All right? It's the same in Washington. You can't, this is an absolute myth that there is some intelligence someplace that's going to take care of all your problems. What made America great is we did it ourselves. I don't know if you used de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, a great book about what made us great. Back in the 18th century, he came from France. He was sent over to America to try to find out what this new country was about that seemed to work. So he was aristocrat. He was one of the top people in the justice system. And they sent him over to study the American penal system. And he went all around the country. It was smaller then, of course, but he went all around the country looking for how the American penal system worked. He finally found out there wasn't any. There was no American, in fact, he couldn't find the American national government anywhere. And yet he said, you know, there's something very strange about this. They do all their government locally, and they do more privately than they do even locally. They set up, when Americans want to do something, they set up an association to do anything. They want schools, they do it themselves. Welfare, they do it themselves. That's so unlike my country of France, which, remember, had gone the other way long before. In my country, if you want something done, you go to the government, and if you can sell them on it, it happens. If you can't, it doesn't happen. I also happen to have studied in England. This de Tocqueville says, if you want something done there, you go to the aristocracy, and you don't even worry about parties. you can get them, it'll happen. In America, if they want something, they do it themselves. And he says that's why they're so enormously successful. We've gone a long way away from what made America great. The challenge is, how do we get back? Seems to me your challenge is very simple. There's only 3 courses as far as I can see. First one is continue what we're doing, right? And that's basically kind of what most enlightened opinion says, probably most average Americans would think that too. Well, just go along and we'll get through this somehow or other. That enormous debt, well, somehow we'll pay it off. We'll worry about it when we get closer to it. The fact that the economic system has been in recession so long, well, sooner or later it'll come out. Bureaucracy, the government, well, they'll find some way to do it. That's the first choice, and I'd say that's probably the most likely choice. But if that is the choice, I think you're going to find out you got to pay your bills sooner or later. This is not the Emerald City. The second choice is to do what the progressives want, what they wanted to do since Wilson, and even earlier, but mainly in America from him. Give them the power to do what they want. The most intelligent progressives today will say, well, the reason why we haven't been able to do it more is that it's still so decentralized power, and what we have to do is bring more power to Washington, and therefore we'll solve all of these problems. Cut down the power of local governments or churches or voluntary associations, business, local government, state government. Take power away from the Congress and give more to the president. Give more power to the great minds in the Supreme Court. That's the second option. Give them the power that they say they need to solve these problems, and not be worrying about getting majorities in Congress or elections or local governments finding ways to get around what they want, or private sector going in different ways. Give them the power. Of course, the problem is, you ask every poll that's ever taken in America, they don't want to do that. And the only reason they've gotten as much centralized power is they've done it so little at a time, nobody really has figured it out. You know, the old thing that if you try to put the heat up directly on a frog in a can of water, you jump right out. But if you do it slowly enough, he'll stay there until you fry him. The third solution, the one, of course, I'm recommending to you, is go back to what made America great, which is to get as much as possible out of Washington and back to people in their private or local responsibility. That is the solution. We've been following what one of the great thinkers, probably the greatest thinker of the 20th century, a guy named Frederick Hayek, who influenced my book a lot. He says, when people look back on the 20th century, which is when most of this screw up, they're going to say the thing that impressed them most was this superstitious idea that centralized expertise can solve people's problems. The complexity is enormous. It's been estimated there are 10 to the 46 atoms in the solar system. It's a lot of ones with zeros after them. There are more intercortical connections in one person's mind in 1 minute than 10 to the 46 power. All right, we're trying to take a science that's done wonderful things about nature and trying to think we can act like scientists or wizards to plan everything for everybody else. But the levels of complexity of atoms and even one person's mind, and then add that's in 1 second, add how many minutes in a day, days in a year, or how long you live, and then, hey, you got to interact with other people. Well, then you got to multiply that times that person's complexity, and then his and hers, and we're trying to do the impossible. The founders wouldn't put it in that way, but they understood this reality, that there is no mastermind who can solve all of these problems for us. I could go on forever, but that's why I have a book, all right? So I'll end with this. This, to me, I think, is our challenge. At the last cabinet meeting I was at, the president has asked me to go before it and give a chart presentation on how we were doing. And we promised, as I said, to cut 100,000, and we did. But by the third and fourth year, we were starting to add them back on again. It's so much easier to give stuff away than it is to say no, and you've seen that in your own life. It's hard to say no. So we were starting to add people back on, so the president asked me to show him that it was happening and to tell him that we need to do more effort to do it. And after I finished it, and in a cabinet room, it's relatively small, smaller than this room, and everybody's sitting around the table, and when I was finished, everyone looks over to the President Reagan, and he's just sitting there kind of thinking, and when the president is quiet, believe me, he's quiet. He says, you know, everything I've read, he said, makes me realize, I know how difficult it is for you to do this. People like to think things are easy, but I'm asking you to do something very difficult. I'm asking you to say no. To say we have to keep our promise to the American people. We have to return to the principles that made America great. He said, frankly, I don't think any country has gone this far down the road and has been able to come back. I'll tell you, it was really quiet in that room then, because Reagan was a very, very optimistic person. In fact, his favorite story was, he should tell the story about this kid who was just wildly optimistic, and no matter what happened, he would think, oh, it's going to all turn out all right. Even to the point the mother and father were worried that this would be dangerous for him when he gets out there. So they sat down, and the mother and father said, well, we're going to have to do something to teach this kid about the world is a tough place to live. And the father says, well, I got an idea. His mother says, what? What? He said, we're not going to give him anything for Christmas. The mother said, well, that's kind of tough. Well, it's probably necessary. So the kid comes running down the stairs on Christmas morning. There's nothing there. There's no tree, no presents, no nothing. And he looks around, Dad, what's going on here? Where are the presents? He said, you're not getting any. Mom, how can this be? This is Christmas. We got to have presents and good things to eat and trees, and there's nothing here. And she said, well, your dad said you're not getting anything. You're not getting it. The father says, there's only one thing you're getting. Open that door up. There's a little room off the living room. He opens it up, and it's full of manure. And the kid looks at it. He said, what's that? He said, the father says, that's all you're getting, manure. The kid looks at it for a minute, and he thinks, and all of a sudden a big smile comes on his face. He runs out of the room and comes back with his shovel. And he starts digging. The father said, what are you, crazy? What are you doing? You're getting manure. That's it. He said, listen, Dad, with all that manure there's got to be a pony under there. So Reagan was an optimist. So at the end of this cabinet meeting, Reagan had just said, I don't know any country that's gone this far down that's come back. He said, but I want us to be the first. And that's your challenge. Thanks for having me.
The same today?
Complexity so much more today.
So why would we want to go back?
Because they made a system that worked with complexity. And listen, what's easier to manage centrally? A little tribe with 10 people in it, or something with hundreds of millions of people? I mean, the fact that it's gotten more complex makes this argument stronger, not weaker. Listen, I know what you're saying. That's what every progressive said. That's been their argument since they did that. With all this new complexity, we got to bring more and more intelligence to the center. But the fact is, the more you bring there, the harder it is to do anything with it. I mean, did the health insurance system work before Obamacare? It did. Maybe it didn't cover enough people, but there were a lot of places to solve that problem. But no, they're going to take the whole thing over. They're going to tell you what stuff you have to get free, what stuff you have to have deductible on. I mean, you can't manage the complexity, and as society gets more complex, it's more and more reason why you have to divide responsibility out.
So you're saying that we should, I'm taking a leap here, but you're saying that we should repeal Obamacare? My question, would you want us to repeal the New Deal?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Tell me what the government does that you think they do better than something else. Give me some specifics. All right, national defense, I agree. They got to do that. That's in the Constitution. It's the main reason they created the Constitution. All right? You can't have every local community, you know, raising their own army. If you do, all of them will fight each other. But what do they run so well? What's the biggest program in the government? Social Security. It's in a financial bust. I didn't make it that way. They did. They've been handling this thing since the 1930s, and it's going bust. The second biggest program is Medicare. It has the most unfunded liability, but second big. How is it handling the problem for the elderly? Again, this financial problem is enormously more than Social Security. All right, that's the second. What's the third? Veterans, that's a national government responsibility, no question. Civil service retirements, the next. By the way, we pay them very well in their retirement system for doing all this good work. And you probably should have something for them. But if they were doing a lot less, there'd be a lot fewer of them, and we give them, after 30 years, you can retire with full pay and stuff like that. It's crazy, all right? But what's the next biggest program? But anyway, I don't care. Just go down the programs and tell me. Agriculture. There are more people work for the Department of Agriculture than are farmers. Something's wrong here, right? There are more people taking care of them that are doing the job. I mean, tell me what you think they can do better. All right, I won't pick on you, though. Go ahead.
This will have to be our last question because the other class will be coming.
Okay.
I am a reformed big government. I am not that in favor of it anymore so much. My question, though, is what are the logistical issues, obviously, and the PR issues that you see? Maybe one or two examples of the biggest ones, and how, perhaps, without giving away too much of the content of your book, you can get over some of those things and move forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, frankly, I think Social Security and Medicare are impossible to get rid of or change. I mean, you're taken away from old people, sick. So, and defense, obviously, you have to do, and the other ones that are in Article 1, Section 8. Now, we just gave those things to the federal government. I'm not sure it could survive, because I'll give them to them, all right? But I want everything else to go back. Education, transportation, none of these things are federal things to begin with. Energy, education. So my plan, you're right, you got to take into account reality, all right? And reality says these programs are pretty much untouchable. But at least let's get rid of the other ones that they can't handle well anyway. Okay, thanks for having me. The other class is here.